The Hardtail electric mountain bike for riders of all shapes, sizes, and riding abilities is back for 2022. These Hardtail electric mountain bikes from Cube are always popular buys, and we're going to be looking today in depth at the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro 500. So let's take a look. We've got a lot to cover in this video, so let's go ahead and get started and talk about specs, baby.
Let's talk about specs, baby.
Starting off with that Bosch Performance CX Generation 4 motor with 85 Newton meters of torque and also 250 watts. Of course, this classic Class 1 eMTB motor is going to be outfitted on the Reaction Hybrid Pro. That pairs with a 500 watt-hour battery. That's going to get you, I would say, at least 20 to 40 miles pretty easily, more if you're being more conservative with that battery, and maybe you're on flatter terrain as well. What's also going to save you some battery is having a massive gear ratio, and you do have that. It's a Shimano Dior derailleur with 11 speeds, but it's going to be an 11 to 51 tooth cassette, which is a huge gear ratio. That's about as big a cassette as you see on most high-level full suspension eMTBs. That group set is going to be rounded out with Shimano MT200 hydraulic disc brakes, front and rear on 180mm rotors. Of course, it's a hardtail eMTB, which means there's only going to be suspension up front, but you have got the X-Fusion MIG32 with lockout and 100mm of travel on this bike. The lockout's nice because this is an excellent bike both for getting to the trail and also riding on trails. So if you got some climbs on the roads on the way to the trails and when you get to hills on the trails as well, you can lock out that fork and really get some excellent efficiency out of this bike. That X-Fusion fork is going to be an air spring as well, which is a nice added bonus. Frequently, you'll see spring coils in these 100mm forks, but having that air fork is going to add a lot of comfort. Since it is a hardtail eMTB, you're definitely going to want some plus-size tires on this, and Cube has you set up with it. It is going to be the Schwalbe Smart Sam tires that are 2.6 inches wide. I really like the Smart Sam tires on this bike because, again, it's a very versatile bike in that it can ride roads and trails. These Smart Sam tires have enough knobbiness so that on the trails you're definitely gripping that dirt, but when you're on the roads it's not complete overkill. These might be something to upgrade eventually if you're riding it only on trails, but if you're using it the way I see most people using it on trails and roads and rails to trails, these are excellent tires. You might not think geometry is as important on a hardtail eMTB, but I would argue it's even more important than on a full suspension. And Cube has you set up with their agile trail geometry with a 74-degree seat tube angle and a 68-degree head tube angle. This is excellent for cross-country and single-track usage, but it does allow you to grow into the bike a little bit if you want to go on something that's a little bit more intense in the future. I mentioned earlier that one of the things I love about this bike is that it's a bike for riders of all shapes, sizes, and ability levels, and the reason I always like to say that is because it has frame sizes as small as 13.5 inches and trapeze frames. So that means this hardtail eMTB doesn't just have the typical top tube, but it has a low step option as well. That 13.5 inch frame as well is going to fit riders that are right around 5 foot as well, and sometimes less. So when you look at it, it truly looks like a bike that could get just about anyone out on the trails. It's great for beginners, but as you're about to see, it can be really fun for advanced riders as well, because we are going to have Austen take this bike out, put it through its paces, and see just how hard he can take it, and we'll do some sections that are a little bit more chill as well. When we come back here, we are going to talk a little bit more about what we thought on the Reaction Hybrid Pro 500, and we are going to compare it to a couple of other bikes that serve the same purpose in the e-bike industry and see how it stacks up against them. Austen, take it away.
We are out here today on the 2022 Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro 500. Again, a mouthful from Cube Bikes, but we're out here, put it to the test, and let you know what we think about it. Let's go. Okay, now that we climbed up, let's point the bike back downhill a little bit. Put it to the limit, maybe. Let's just flow it. That's what this bike's built for. Woo. Woo. Watch out for the Yucca. Woo. rolling into it. Let's clear it. Make sure I'm in turbo mode. The tech rock section into the deep water. All right, let's see if we can get up the face. Woo! Oh, there we go. No feet down today. We made it. Haha, let's go. There we go. One thing you'll notice right off the bat when you ride a hardtail, especially if you've ridden a full suspension before, is that since it's a rigid rear hardtail, you don't have any sag from your suspension, so the bottom bracket height stays at its level the entire time as you're pedaling over tough rocks like we're about to encounter right here. So it's really capable in steeper, more technical terrain like that. Easily pedaled over, no pedal strike, because the bottom bracket stays higher without the sag of the rear suspension. So hardtail takes the cake on that category. And also when you talk about how I just cleared that rock with that extra little pedal stroke, that goes into the segment that I was talking to about power transfer. Without that rear shock, you're able to get the power down faster, and it's delivered to the pedals, in my opinion, in a little bit more of an aggressive way. Woo. Aha. Let her rip. We'll take this little high line right here. Woo-hoo-hoo. Ah, chattery. Woo. Haha. A little bunny hoppable areas. This bike is just so playful. Scrub this. Woo. Jump out of that. Woo. There we go. Blasting. Very playful. This bike is just a do-it-all machine. It's great for around town, great for, let's say, if you want to commute on it, but when you want to take it out into the mountains like Scott and I are doing today, it can also do that extremely well and is a very capable machine when it comes down to it.
So as you saw, this bike can definitely take a beating and be put through a lot, as you saw, because we were riding some super wet conditions. But we want to talk a little bit more about how this bike stacks up against other hardtail electric mountain bikes. Of course, one of the main things you're going to do when comparing 2 or 3 bikes is probably look at the price, and as always, you can get the most up-to-date pricing by clicking on this card up here or on the first link in the description below. The first bike we're taking a look at is the MaxMax Commensol Power. At first glance, taking a look at this bike, nothing particularly wrong with it. It's a pretty typical hardtail eMTB setup. Does have that external battery on there, and it is a Shimano E7000, which isn't really even close to the EP8 that came out recently in terms of power. So that's something to take a look at. It's definitely going to have less power in the motor. A lot of the other specs stay about the same. You got a Shimano Dior drivetrain on there as well. That front fork is definitely appealing. I did have a look at the geometry though, because it looked like it was super raked out, and it is. So it's a 66-degree head tube angle on this, which kind of left me questioning, like, who is this bike for? It almost seems like it should be a full suspension mountain bike. So yeah, that was something I was just kind of confused about, I guess. It's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it's kind of like an enduro bike that's a hardtail, which isn't really a thing. The other thing, if you look a little bit closer on the Commensol website, is that this bike isn't going to be available into third quarter 2022, whereas the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro is available right now. So it kind of depends. You've got to look close at those specs and see if it is worth waiting that long. One of the other pretty direct comparisons is the Trek Powerfly 4. Even just looking at the styling of this bike, it does look pretty similar. You've got that integrated battery, also has the Bosch Performance CX motor. You can tell these bikes are set up for a similar purpose because they have similar forks. You've got that Suntour XCM on this fork. As we talked about though, that's going to be a coil spring in that one, whereas the X Fusion is going to be an air spring. I always prefer air springs. They're easier to maintain and they can usually take a little bit more of a beating than a coil spring. So to me, that's definitely a check mark in the box for the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro 500. There's also another situation with the Trek Powerfly 4 where they seem to have sort of tried to make a downhill hardtail eMTB, which is just difficult to wrap my brain around. So if you're looking for, I guess, whatever that is, then that is going to be the bike. But if you're looking for more of like an all-around cross-country sort of do-everything bike, then you're gonna wanna go with the Cube Reaction Pro 500. The final hardtail eMTB we're gonna compare this bike to is the Specialized Turbo Taro 3.0. Now of all the comparisons, this is probably the one I would be looking at the closest. The Turbo Taro is gonna be a significantly lower price point, which is definitely a nice start. And then from there, a lot of the components do stay the same. You still got those Shimano hydraulic disc brakes. They're gonna be on 180mm rotors. You do have an Alavio 9-speed derailleur on this on an 11 to 36 tooth cassette. As we mentioned, the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro is going to have that 11 to 51 tooth cassette on a Shimano Dior. You can further see why these bikes are such different prices when you look at the power system. You've got the Specialized motor on there with 50 Newton meters of torque. And of course, you'll remember that the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro has that Bosch Performance CX with 85 Newton meters. But the batteries do stay about the same. It's 530 watt hours on the Specialized and of course 500 on the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro. So basically I would say if you're really looking for like super entry level, no knock on entry level, everyone's got to start somewhere, then go with the Taro. But if you want something of an upgrade, then go with the Reaction Hybrid Pro. Now, the other thing is that the Specialized Taro, they're pretty limited stock, so basically, if that one's out of stock, then you know you're going with this one. But let's get back into talking about how we felt on the ride, specifically with that Reaction Hybrid Pro 500. You saw how hard Austen was able to take it, of course. I'm never going to be riding like that though, and I still love the Reaction Hybrid Pro because it's more fit for my style of riding. I don't go that hard, I don't need to go that hard, but I do like to have something that's going to be fun to ride on trails and also get me to trails because I live close to quite a few. No reason to get in the car if I don't need to. You can add to that versatility on this bike and turn it into sort of a touring bike, a long-term touring bike, because you can add a rack to the back too. If you want to go with more than just a rack, you can grab one of the all-road Performance 500s. This is going to be a version of the Reaction Hybrid that is set up for touring, road riding. It still has those like chunky tires, so you can do trails on it as well. On that model, you get fenders and integrated lights. Overall for me, it is the versatility in the riding styles and also the frame styles you can get on the Reaction Hybrid Pro 500, the reliability of that Bosch Performance CX motor, and the fact that this bike is available right now that sell me on the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro 500. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Fly Rides Electric Bike channel. Leave a comment below, let me know if we missed any hardtail eMTBs that you're looking at in the same price range so we can help you compare. If after watching this video you're like, I think I might want to go with something a little more full suspension, I'd recommend checking out the Cube Stereo Hybrid 140 HPC Pro 625 video. But if you want to know more about the Cube Reaction Hybrid Pro 500, remember that link is in the description below. Until next time, enjoy the ride.